Ladies and gentlemen, this is TVP World. You're watching another edition of Break the Fake, where we debunk fake news and combat false narratives. I'm your host, Benjamin Lee, and let's get rolling. Iran is now living through what doctors and human rights activists are already calling a mass extermination, neatly hidden behind digital darkness. According to estimates by doctors working inside the country, more than 16,000 people have died in just 3 weeks of protests. This is not a metaphor, not a Western information attack, not social media exaggeration. These are dry tallies from morgues and hospitals. According to the Sunday Times, the Iranian authorities use a proven 21st century method. First, shut down the internet, then do whatever you want. The total blackout gave security forces freedom from cameras, witnesses, and inconvenient questions. Families have no idea where their relatives are, bodies are being quietly removed, and for some families, the state demands so-called bullet money just to release the bodies of the dead. The cynicism is so open that ideology is no longer even pretending to be involved. Medical professionals report combat weapon use on the protesters and widespread injuries to heads and eyes. Children are among the victims. Some hospitals have been refusing blood transfusions to wounded protesters. Apparently, under the regime's logic, blood is also part of the conspiracy. Iran's supreme leader admitted that several thousand people have died, while carefully blaming the American president and the protesters themselves. In other words, they were at fault for failing to survive the bullets. Independent data shows the scale of violence is unprecedented in the 47-year history of the Islamic Republic. The Guardian reports that Tehran wants to permanently cut the country off from the global internet, turning access into a state privilege. And this is where Russia enters the picture. As researcher Nikol Gorayevsky writes in Foreign Affairs, Iran actively relies on Russian technologies for surveillance, control, and the suppression of dissent. The network control architecture is almost identical to a system built with the participation of Russian internet monitoring services. Now, traffic filtering, service blocking, total monitoring. Russian suppliers, particularly NTC Protel, are helping Iranian mobile operators deploy interception in traffic management systems. The export of digital authoritarianism is moving forward smoothly with no sanctions and no delays. The Iranian regime has demonstrated that in the 21st century, mass repression no longer requires secrecy. Turning off Wi-Fi is enough, and when experienced partners help, digital darkness stops being a technical problem and becomes official policy. Dictatorships used to fear exposure, now they just switch off the lights. The Russian occupation authorities in the Kherson region have once again proven that if you really want to loot, ideology will always show up on time to help. This time, the theft is marketed as a fight against the oligarchs. Russian propaganda outlets are eagerly quoting Vladimir Chizhov, who's been presenting himself as the governor of Kherson region and cheerfully announcing that the property of Ukrainian oligarchs have become the property of Russia and will now serve the people. Which people, however, he does not clarify. Presumably a very specific group, those with the right passports and even better connections in Moscow.
Начиная с 2023 года проводится работа по разграничению всего имущества, которое находится на территории Херсонской области. Разграничению между федеральными органами власти, муниципальными органами власти и субъектовыми областными. И, соответственно, то имущество, которое принадлежало всем тем и олигархам, и менее таким зажиточным, но все-таки фермерам, там, латифундистам, которых на территории Херсонской области много, оно все сейчас является собственностью, государственной собственностью Херсонской области. Работа по его оформлению ведется. Какая-то часть передается в федеральную собственность, но большая часть является собственностью Херсонской области. И, конечно же, оно будет служить людям, которые живут в Херсонской области.
In reality, the loud language of nationalization hides something far less sophisticated. It's just plain robbery. The targets are not some abstract oligarchs, but ordinary Ukrainian business people, farmers, owners of grain elevators, warehouses, and agricultural businesses. People who spent decades building their life's work are suddenly informed that they are now apparently enemies of the people. Unpleasant news, but extremely convenient for those who arrived carrying machine guns. The process is familiar from other temporarily occupied territories. First, the business is declared ownerless or conveniently labeled oligarch-owned. Then comes an inventory, usually with armed men present. After that, the property somehow ends up in the hands of Russian businessmen who appear right on schedule with ready documents and carefully rehearsed devotion to the Russian world. With this scheme, the occupiers solve several tasks at once. They strip Ukrainians of the economic foundations of life on their own land, they manufacture a loyal business elite in the occupied territories, and they still manage to speak solemnly about social justice even as grain disappeared towards unknown destinations. Russia's so-called fight against oligarchs in the Kherson region has nothing to do with ideology and even less to do with the people. It is just ordinary colonial plunder wrapped in recycled communist language. When arguments run out, you start nationalizing. When support is missing, you invent myths. And when shame is gone entirely, you publish a balance sheet that officially rebrands Stev as serving the people. Russian authorities are once again performing their favorite ritual, explaining reality through Western envy. This time, the trigger is the Oreshnik missile, which Moscow claims France is allegedly desperate to attain. At least that's the version voiced by Vladimir Chizhov, first deputy chairman of the Federation Council Committee on Defense and Security. According to him, French President Emmanuel Macron is eager to purchase the missile, but Russia is not yet ready to sell it. Chizhov also questioned France's ability to create anything similar, casting doubt on what he called the technical genius of the French military-industrial complex.
На этой неделе слава Макрона о том, что Европе нужен свой орешник. Как вам кажется, какие выводы делают в европейских властных кабинетах в Париже, в Брюсселе после удара по Львову?
Ну, если он хочет обратиться, чтобы купить орешник, у нас, думаю, мы ему не продадим пока. Сделать свой подобный, ну, я рискну предположить, что технический гений французского военно-промышленного комплекса сильно не дотягивает до такого уровня.
Но, видимо, завидуют. Еще одна тема.
Завидуют, да. Завидовать проще, чем самому делать что-то.
Это да.
And here's where reality intrudes, unfortunately without consulting the Russian worldview. First, there have been no statements by Macron expressing any desire to buy Oreshnik. None, not official, not unofficial, nada. Second, France is among the small group of states with a full nuclear deterrent, modern missile programs, an independent space sector, a defense industry that does not rely on extracting microchips from household appliances. Against that background, talk of an insufficient technical level sounds less like analysis and more like projection. Chizhov's remarks are not really about missiles and not really about France. They're about the Russian government's chronic need to affirm its own greatness by inventing the desires of others. In this puerile reality, the West is constantly dreaming of Russian weapons, while Moscow magnanimously refuses to sell them. Speaking from the imagined heights of its technical genius, the problem is simple. While Russian officials are busy explaining what they will not sell, the rest of the world is investing in technology that actually exists and in futures that do not require imaginary buyers. And with that, we conclude this edition of Break the Fake. But for more news, update, and commentary, please stay tuned to TVP World.